move this podium to the side because I like to have a little bit of room to wander around. So hopefully this will still work for you over there, and I think we're good with that. And my presentation should be good to go, so are we good with that? Wonderful. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a wonderful event, and I know that the big numbers we have here are here for Dr. Yoon and not for me, but I'm certainly happy to bask in his glory and to enjoy and appreciate that as well. And Todd, you know, it gets a little more complicated than that. Sometimes when we're out working at Trinity Academy, my dad comes, and so then we have the other Dr. L as well. So three of us. It gets a little confusing. Theme this year for this year's housing forecast is jump into the ring. And it's a circus theme, and I just love my graphic designers. They do such a wonderful job every single year. And by the way, if you ever need anything done, you can actually meet my graphic designer back there. Nama Marcos with Visual Fusion is back in the back. So they're videoing the event for us today so that we can take all the presentations and make them available to you later. But with all the wonderful work that my graphic designers do, it wouldn't be possible for me to pay them and then to pay to have these beautiful publications printed if it wasn't for the extremely generous donations that we get from Security First Title and Meritrust Credit Union. Because of the wonderful way that they support us in the real estate community at writ large, but also at Wichita State, we're able to put these together. We have boxes and boxes and boxes of these over at the realtor's office, and I would encourage you as you leave today, go by, pick up a box or 2 or 4, take them back to your office to use them in your listing presentations, in relocation packets. They are there for you to be able to use and take advantage of with your clients and your customers. I also have to give a big thanks to all of the realtor boards across the state, including the South Central Kansas MLS and the South Central Kansas Realtors, but also the Kansas Association of Realtors, Lawrence Board of Realtors, Kansas City Regional Association of Realtors, Manhattan Association, now the Flint Hills Association, Sunflower. Most of you know for about 10 years now, we've had a partnership with the Kansas Association of Realtors where we access all of the different MLS systems across the state. We find a way to make them all talk to each other despite all your various vendors and oddities that we have. And then we use those to compile statewide MLS statistical reports that you can then access through the Kansas Association of Realtors. As a part of that, we also provide local MLS statistical reports. And so the reports that you receive every month from the South Central Kansas MLS, we prepare those for you, and then they go through the South Central Kansas MLS. They're your data, your reports. But what that does is it frees up your staff time so that you don't have to have your staff spending lots and lots of time compiling those reports. That's possible because of a contract that we have with the Kansas Association of Realtors, and it's a benefit to you as realtor members. So we're very grateful for that partnership. So with that, Dr. Yoon talked about the overall economic conditions and what's happening in the nation as a whole, and he touched on what's happening in Wichita. And of course, our unemployment rates are at the lowest that they've been since the 1960s. It's incredibly low unemployment rates, and essentially, everybody who wants to have a job has one. And that's the short answer that you can take for it. But there's this strange dichotomy that we have, and again, Dr. Yoon mentioned this about Wichita, is that our employment has not been growing as fast as the nation as a whole. Now, this is a little bit of an odd graph, but I think that there's some real lessons that we can learn from it. So here's what I've done. I've taken the official non-farm employment numbers, which is the number of jobs. If you surveyed businesses and you asked how many people are working at your business, that's the number that we have here. I've then normalized them to the beginning of 2008, which is roughly when employment peaked across Kansas prior to the onset of the Great Recession. Every number on this chart is employment relative to where it was back at the beginning of 2008. So for instance, you can see the purple line at the bottom of this is Wichita. And our total employment in Wichita between the beginning of 2008 and middle of 2011, when we bottomed out, it went from a level of 100 down to about 92, 93. What that means is we lost 7.5% of our jobs between the beginning of 2008 and 2011. Since then, we've regained some of our employment, but we are still at a level of about 97, meaning that we are still 3% lower in terms of the number of people working here in the Wichita metropolitan area compared to where we were prior to the onset of the Great Recession. Now, the big exception in all of this, of course, is Kansas City, which is the blue line that's grown, and they are now up at a level of about 108. So they have 8% more jobs than they did at the beginning of the Great Recession. Why do we have this dichotomy? How can we have such low unemployment rates and yet our employment numbers have not been growing? In short, it's related to the challenge that we are not growing in terms of our population base. Businesses here in Wichita, most of you know Jeremy Hill, who does the annual employment forecast. He also does surveys around the state of businesses, and it's in Wichita area as well. The story that he hears is, we want to hire. We have jobs available. We're willing to pay more for those jobs, but we just can't find people to fill the positions, or at least people who are capable of doing the jobs we need. And as Dr. Yoon mentioned, it's not just in fast food jobs or some lower level service job. It's across the board, whether it's professional services, whether it's the trades, you name it. Employers across the state are looking for people. They're just having trouble finding them. Part of that challenge is this long-term secular change, meaning it's something outside the business cycle, of people moving from smaller metropolitan areas to bigger metropolitan areas. So there are a lot of young people who move from Wichita up to Kansas City, people who move from Kansas City to bigger metro areas like Dallas or Chicago. And so this is a continuing trend, but we need to do things that find ways to make Wichita a really attractive and desirable place for people to move to so that we can expand that employment base. But from a standpoint of what it means for our housing market, our labor market is solid. People who are here have jobs, they have good wages that are going up, and they aren't fearful that they're going to lose their jobs. So that's still a positive for the housing market. What is the official employment forecast? So a couple of weeks ago, Jeremy Hill released the employment forecast, and the numbers this year are slightly down, that we expect for employment to be down about 0.1% in 2018. But the forecast for next year is one of the best forecasts that he's had in a long time. 0.8% isn't a lot from a national perspective, but for Wichita, that's pretty solid. And so he's seeing the things that are coming down the pike, especially in relation to his conversations with different employers in the area. And he sees that as being a positive trend for us. So again, a solid, if not spectacular, employment forecast. Dr. Yoon also mentioned the mortgage rates and what was happening with mortgage rates. I was stunned this last week when the Mortgage Bankers Association came out with their most recent forecast for the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. When I put together this publication, they were forecasting that by the end of next year, mortgage rates would rise to 5.2% by the end of 2019. Now, they are forecasting that mortgage rates will top out next year at 5.1% and stay there through the end of 2020. I've not done any formal statistical forecasts of mortgage rates, but I tend to be more in line with Dr. Yoon in expecting that we're going to see rates continue to go up. Probably not above 6% in the time horizon that we have here in the short term, but it's hard for me to believe we're already just right at 5%. It's hard for me to believe that we're just going to sit here for the next 2 years. I'll give it to their forecast. They tend to be a little smarter than I am in forecasting these things. By the way, you all of course know that economic forecasters were put on the earth to make the weatherman look good. So the story of the market, as you all know, is the inventory of homes available for sale. And Dr. Yoon talked about nationally the inventories have been on this long-term trend down. Wichita, it's even tighter. We're sitting in a situation now where we're at about a 2.5 month supply, and that's already in the period where seasonally we normally go up. So our inventories are incredibly tight. And as you know, those inventories are even tighter based on the price ranges. Those two bottom lines that we have on this graph, those are the month's supply of homes that are either listed below $150,000, or the red line is between $150,000 and $250,000. And in those situations, we're talking about a 2-month supply. And as most of you also know, that probably overstates what's really available, because there are a chunk of those homes out there that have been on the market a long time, and they may officially be on the market, but nobody in their right mind is going to buy them. And so the actual inventory of really desirable homes in the price ranges that people want, you know that I extol the values of having a realtor involved in the transaction. I really believe as a home seller, people don't recognize how many things have to happen for that transaction to close. And I loved about 15 years ago, the National Association had an ad campaign that the tagline was, "You have a life, we let you live it." And the point was that selling your house is a very complicated process, and that when you sell your home, a lot of things could happen that you may not be aware of that could make that deal go south. So I've always thought as a seller it made sense. Right now, I tell my students, I tell people in the community, if you're a buyer and you really want to buy, I can't imagine trying to do that by going to Zillow or some other website and just trying to do it alone. Because by the time you look at the houses that are the houses you want, they're gone. And so from a buyer's perspective, it's just absolutely essential to have a realtor involved in that transaction. So these inventories are just stunning. What does that mean for home sales? It means that our home sales activity are constrained. It's not constrained based on demand, it's constrained based on the number of homes that are available and listed on the market. And so we're forecasting home sales next year to be ever so slightly up, but essentially flat. And that's based on demand, on supply of homes, not based on demand. The demand for homes is incredibly strong, and if we could get more inventory out there, we would see sales continue to increase at a much stronger pace. Well, if you have demand that's strong and you have constrained supply, we ought to be seeing prices going up, and that's exactly what we've seen. But I think there's an interesting story here that I thought you'd find this intriguing. So once again, this is an index graph. And so I put the starting point as 2007, which is the beginning of, it was basically when home prices peaked prior to the financial crisis. And then I asked, if you bought a $100,000 home at the beginning of 2007, and you bought the average Wichita home, how much would it be worth over time? And so you can see that the Wichita home prices, the blue line, stayed essentially flat for about 4 or 5 years, and then we've increased, and now that $100,000 home that was bought in 2007 would be worth about $120,000. If you bought the average US home in 2007, it would also be up, but it would only be worth about $112,000. Now, how many of you would have guessed that Wichita would have outpaced the United States in terms of overall home price appreciation? I thought I had a mistake when I first put this graph together. But it turns out your benchmark of comparison matters. This is correct, but what if we went back to 2000? And so I did the same graph, and I went back to the beginning of 2000. And at that point, you bought a $100,000 home. The Wichita home, which value would have gone up now to about $145,000. But the average US home, if you bought it in 2000, would have gone up to about $183,000. What happened is we didn't see the big run up in the early 2000s. We also didn't see the big crash in the late 2000s. And the run up that we've had recently is, again, that slow but steady wins the race, unless you started back in 2000, in which case you fell behind. But where the story that I take away from this is that Wichita home prices, we are seeing solid, steady appreciation, but we're not going to see the stellar numbers that you sometimes see in the coastal markets around the United States. And largely it's because we have lots of land. Land is available. So people move into Wichita. We have lots and lots of people move into Wichita. That would be wonderful, right? Have another 50,000, 100,000 people move into the Wichita area. We've got the land to build new houses for them. You have an extra million people move into Southern California, they just have to pile on top of each other because there's no more land between the mountains and the ocean. It's just, that's what they have. And so, again, we don't have the big peaks, but we don't have the big drops. What is our forecast? We've had solid appreciation. Matter of fact, that appreciation back in 2016 is stronger than I think is sustainable. But last year it was 4.4%. We forecast that through the end of this year it'll be 3.8% and another 4.5% next year. That's a really strong number for Wichita, but it's sustainable. It's not a number that outpaces what the market can bear. And so I think that's a really solid thing. The negative number that I have is the new home construction forecast. And it's not really negative. What I'm basically saying is using the Wichita Area Building Association's numbers, we're sitting at about 1,000 permits a year, and we have been for the past 5 years. We're going to continue at that pace for the next couple of years. There are two things that are holding back new home construction in the Wichita area. Number one, I mentioned population growth. If we saw more bodies come into the market, we would need more housing and we would be building more housing. But as you know, we have really limited inventory of the homes available for sale, and so as a result, we should be seeing more construction to fill that void. But the problem is that even as existing home prices have been rising in recent years, construction costs have been rising even faster. And so when you look at that sweet spot of homes, say between $150,000 and $250,000, where you've got a lot of potential buyers and a real shortage of homes available, building a house in that price range is really, really tough, and what you're able to build is going to be not as much of a home as what you're able to buy in the existing home market. And so unless that buyer is really set, I want a new home, I want a new home, it's still difficult for them to compete in that range. So we don't forecast a change in this in the next few months. That is everything that I have forecast, and I thought that it would be good to keep a really short presentation here today because I don't know about you, but I'm really interested to hear what our panelists have to say about what's going on today, not just back when I put these numbers together. So we have the Wichita forecast numbers. Those are all up here. I also have forecasts for all of the major markets across the state. You can see that summary in the back of your publication, and you can download all of the publications from our website. Our website is wichita.edu/real-estate. And I should also mention that on our website, you can get access to the presentation that I have here today. It's available right there on the home page. On the right-hand side, it'll say latest presentation, and you can click and download all of my slides. Once again, cannot thank Bernsey, folks at Mitch, you're there with Meritrust. John, you're somewhere around here, I saw there with Meritrust, all of you. The support that we get from Security First and Meritrust Title, we're just so blessed to have them in our community, and we're very, very grateful. So thank you all for making this publication possible and for all you do for the real estate industry. And that is my presentation.